Oh. Okay, cool. So welcome everyone to the Advanced iOS Workshop. My name is Edward, and I'm really excited to work with everyone here today. So quick question at the start. Like, I wanted to get a sense, because I know there was an earlier Intro to iOS workshop, and I unfortunately wasn't able to stop by. So can anyone, was anyone over here at the Intro to iOS workshop? Raise your hand. Okay, a few of you. So can you give me like a quick overview of what you covered earlier today?
So pretty much we made like a tip calculator app. It was pretty basic. We used the segmented, I forget the name already, but it's like it's the segmented buttons. So you have like three options, like 50%, 10%, and 20%.
Okay.
And it was just kind of like simple UI stuff, auto layout, and yeah, the control drag. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it was the simple stuff, like the basics.
Cool. Sounds awesome. Okay, and can everyone in the back hear me? Just wanted to make sure that. Okay, cool. All right, great. So today, just as we're getting started, I just want to make sure that everyone's able to run the application correctly. Let's see. I think so. There's a slight bug in the current iOS 10 simulator that actually makes this one portion of the tutorial not run on the iOS simulator correctly. So I wanted to make sure. Does everyone have a device that they can run this tutorial on? Raise your hand if you have a device that you could plug into your laptop and run the tutorial. Okay. If not, what I would ask you to do is actually go and open up Xcode if you haven't already have it installed. And for the ones of you that you have a device that you can run this on, don't download this because I don't want to screw up the internet. But go into Xcode, go into like, if you already have a project open, or later on, like what you'll do is you'll click on where it says generic iOS device right up here. Say download simulators, and just like download the iOS 9.3 simulator, something like that, so we can start running it in the background. So what we're going to be doing today is we're going to be building this app that I call Stormpath Notes. And so this is actually based off of a tutorial that I wrote online. So if you search on Google, search for Stormpath Notes tutorial, you'll actually see the top result is tutorial. Build an iOS app in Swift that uses a REST API in Stormpath. So this is actually a continuation of the workshop that I did earlier today at 11 a.m. So at the 11 a.m. workshop, we're using Node.js. We kind of went over the intro of Node.js, how the framework works. And we're getting to the point where we're building a REST API to power a mobile app. So at the completion of that tutorial, we actually would go into this tutorial, which is how to build an iOS app that is using the API that we built in the previous tutorial. So what we're going to try to do is we're going to build an app like this. So we're going to build a simple app that you can log in. You can write down some notes. You can take them and it stores them to an external web server, and you'll be able to at the end log out, and those notes will be saved to the web server, and you'll be able to access them later on. So since we're going to be following this tutorial online, definitely go search on Google again, Stormpath Notes tutorial. Open it up, and you can follow like what I'll be doing on stage online. And the other thing that you can do as well is, let's see, if you scroll down, in that tutorial, you see it says this note where it says start out by downloading on GitHub. So I've put up the code for this tutorial up online, and I've created a base template for the project. So the base template is pretty much just all the views already hooked up. So we're not going to have to do anything with the different, making sure that all of the different views work on our device. Instead, the base template is going to make it so that we can just start coding, not worry about the views, and be able to build the application itself. So I'll show you what this base project looks like on this projector. Oh, shoot. That's not good. Okay, I'll show you what this looks like on this projector. So it's a little blurry when I make the screen a little smaller, but you can see here's this basic login screen at the beginning. I can click on login. It will show me this blank screen with a logout button on the bottom. If I click on logout, there's also like a registration screen and so on and so forth. But that's pretty much the basic app, right? I type in something, click login, can type in some notes, and click logout. But this basic template that we're going to be starting out with, it doesn't have any actual code. It just has the views. It just has the views, which then we're going to hook up to our the REST API built in the previous tutorial. I have a version of the REST API hosted, so you don't have to worry about building that yourself. But we're going to be hooking it up to REST API and making that application you saw in the screenshot earlier. So this application right here. So, any questions before we get started? Cool. All right, great. So what we're going to be doing, so the first step, we're going to actually clone this example project that I have on GitHub. So if you search for Stormpath Notes GitHub, I think it should be the first result. Actually, it's the second result, Stormpath iOS Notes example. So what I want you to do is I want you to clone this project. So what that looks like is you'll open up the terminal. So since all of you are on Macs, we'll open up the terminal by opening up. You can press Command Space, type in terminal, and that will open up the terminal right here. And what we need to do is go in GitHub. You'll see this button here that it says clone or download. You can copy this URL that gives you and type in git clone this URL. And once you clone this, it's going to download and copy this project to your computer. Everyone, I know I kind of skipped a few steps for the terminal. So is everyone familiar with how the terminal works and can get this clone? How many of you need help? Right? If you need help, raise your hand or ask a neighbor really quickly. I can give you a minute or two to get it cloned. All right. Looks like everyone's good here. Raise your hands if you have everything cloned now. Awesome. You're fast. Great. So we've cloned this project. It's now on our computer, and it's copied over a folder called stormpath-ios-notes-example to our computer. So next step, what we're going to do is we're going to open up that directory, and we're going to open up this project in Xcode. So we can type in cd stormpath, and if I just press the tab button, it's going to autocomplete, so you don't have to worry about like actually typing everything right over here. But cd stormpath iOS notes example. Last thing what we'll do is we'll actually, I'm going to skip a few steps in my tutorial where it's talking about how to use CocoaPods and how to download external dependencies and add in SDK. Because sometimes internet messes up and I don't want to be stuck for like 10-15 minutes dealing with that. So we're going to check out a specific branch that I have of this tutorial that already has the SDK installed. So we don't have to go through those steps of here's how to install the SDK. So once we change into this directory, I'd like you to type in git checkout base-with-pods. So git checkout base with pods. And here we go. We are now in the base with pods directory. And this directory should now give us everything that we need to get started. So if I now type in the terminal open dot, you'll see it will open up the directory that I just cloned from GitHub. And you'll see all the files that we have to get started in our project. So this project that we're creating, the way that I installed the Stormpath dependency in on here, and you don't have to worry about this too much, but we're using this dependency manager called CocoaPods. So I think if you've used Xcode before, you've created a few projects with it, you're used to opening up the .xcode project file right here that I have highlighted. In a CocoaPods project, if you're using CocoaPods to manage your dependencies, we're actually going to be using the XC workspace file. So XC workspace is basically our project plus all of the dependencies. So if you checked out the base with pods branch correctly, and you opened up the local directory by typing in open dot, or by navigating it into it in Finder, you'll now see this this folder as Stormpath notes.xc workspace. Raise your hands if you see this and you're at this step in the tutorial right now. Okay, cool. Great. So let's open up this this project and see what we have. So we've opened up this project, and as I said, there might be a few problems with the iOS 10 simulator right now because of a bug with the simulator. So I would highly suggest you running it on your local iPhone if possible. But if not, click on over here where it talks about like iPhone 7 Plus or whatever device you'll be using. Click on download simulators, and then I would suggest downloading the iOS 9.3 simulator. So hopefully that's going to work. Otherwise, I'm actually going to have some problems actually demoing the code on the screen. I think I may be able to.
Where do I go to do that?
Huh?
To get that simulator, where I go from?
Yeah, so if you click up right over here, you'll see it says iPhone 7 Plus. We can click on Download Simulators, and then we'll try downloading the iOS 9.3 simulator. And otherwise, we're going to have some problems with the login sort of portion of the tutorial.
Some of you may not see the download simulators option. If so, go to Xcode menu at the top, click on Preferences, and then you'll see a Download tab.
Oh, preferences.
So I think wait, if you don't, hey Rajat, if he doesn't see the downloads tab, is that, or a downloads thing right there, is he because he's using an older version of Xcode?
Yes. Simple.
Okay.
But it will work on 9.1, right?
Yeah, so it will work on the iOS 9 simulator. So if he's on an older version of Xcode, it will work. But the problem now is that I don't have this branch, and then he's also not on Swift 3. So you might have. Okay, cool. So this simulator, I mean, this tutorial is going to be for Swift 3. So if you're not using Xcode 8, some of these steps will be a little off, and you won't actually be able to compile the code in this tutorial, unfortunately. Okay.
Is
Yeah?
it okay to use 9.2 simulator instead? Okay.
Yeah, that's good. So anything that's not the iOS 10 simulator, if you have an iOS 8 simulator, iOS 9,
Okay.
9. What, all of those should work. All right.
9.2, iPhone 6.
Yeah, any of the, basically anything that's not iOS 10 simulator will work. So, yep.
So my quick question is, so I'm trying to boot it on my device, right?
Yeah.
And it's saying to like unlock it, but it's unlocked and connected, and it still says
Just
to, like,
unlock and reconnect your cable.
Just unlock and then put it back in.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay. Great. So what we're going to do, so as you saw earlier, I was running the example code, and I have all these views up, and they seem to work just fine if I want to click log in, if I want to click log out. We're going to, let's see what I had as the next step. Okay. So I have this project set up, and you can see I have 4 files right here. The first one is appdelegate.swift. You can see, appdelegate is always the main file that your project always will start out with. We have the notes view controller.swift, which has some stub functions already in there, but this is the file that controls the view for when you type in some notes, you click on the save button, you click on log out. Then we also have the login view controller right over here, and then the register view controller. So first thing that we're going to hook up right here is the registration view controller. So registration view controller is going to allow us to then register for a new account. And what we're using right here is we're using the Stormpath SDK and the Stormpath API to handle login and registration. So actually, let's see. One second, I want to check one thing. OK, so there's actually 2 things that we have to do to set up the Stormpath SDK. So at this point in the tutorial, we need to set up the Stormpath SDK, and we need to tell it what server to point it to. We have the API that I've set up, and I've basically already set up an API at this URL. You can see it's stormpathnotes.herokuapp.com. And basically what this has is 2 endpoints. This has an endpoint for getting the current notes that the user saved. This has a post endpoint for saving the notes of the current user. It also has 2 other endpoints that are like for registration and login. And so the SDK that that we've downloaded and installed at the beginning is for the login and registration portion of this. So we don't really have to worry about those endpoints. So to configure our app to hit this API, what we'll do is in our appdelegate.swift file, we have this one stub function called application did finish launching with options. And so these different functions are called when the OS finishes loading. This function calls when the OS finishes launching your app and wants to notify, hey, your app is now loaded. Everything's OK. What else do you want to do after we finish loading your app? Your app delegate over here is really for all these different functions. Right? We also have stuff like application will resign active, application did enter background, application will enter foreground. All these different events that iOS will send your application when the state of your application changes. So in this case, we want to be able to configure our SDK when we first load our application. So what we'll do is in this stub function called application did finish launching with options, we're going to add a line of code to configure our Stormpath SDK. To do that, first we got to import the code from the Stormpath SDK. So the topmost part of the file, right underneath import UI kit, where this is importing all the Apple's code for you to use, we'll say import Stormpath. When you click on when you first type this in, it might say cannot find the underlying module for Stormpath, and that's because Xcode actually hasn't indexed all the different pods that we've imported so far. So if we just press the Command B button, Command B is just going to build and try compiling our app, and then that should resolve that error. So we'll say import Stormpath right here, and the application did finishing launching with options. So this is a point where you'll configure most SDKs that you'll use. We'll say Stormpath dot shared session dot configuration dot API URL equals the URL a string https stormpathnotes.herokuapp.com. Let me magnify this quickly.
issue if it still says no such module, Stormpath?
If it still says no such module Stormpath, double check that you've opened up the Xcode workspace file. And if you've already opened up the Xcode workspace file, try pressing Command B to build a project. All right. So again, we're using the Stormpath SDK to handle login and registration right now. If you're using using any other SDK like the Facebook SDK or a Twitter SDK or Firebase, Parse, all the SDKs for the most part, you'll actually be configuring it, and the application did finish launching with options. All right, everyone have this line of code typed in? All right. To double check that you typed in the correct URL, because I know sometimes it's easy to make a typo, just try copying and pasting that URL into your browser. Just make sure you're able to access your this URL. It should give you a web page like this.
Can you go back real quick?
Yeah. Yeah.
When I try to build, it says I have a dependency analysis error.
Yeah.
That at the signing for Stormpath nodes requires a development team.
Okay. Yeah, if you're having problems with building, then what I'd suggest is to click on the project file itself over there. And then what we'll do is we'll just say signing none. Or actually, not none. You'll have to, if you're trying to build it and load it on your iPhone, you'll actually have to sign in with your Apple developer account and build it with that. Then what you might have to do is you might have to change this bundle identifier right up here. Probably just switch it to com.yourname.stormpath notes or whatnot.
Stormpath, we changed to a name.
Can you go back on the code?
Yeah, sure.
Thank you.
Just have to, wait. Yeah, for the dependency analysis, you have to go change your bundle identifier, and also since you're going to load it on your phone, you need to.
All right, raise your hand if you're able to build the app and run it on the simulator or on your local device now. Okay.
Yeah, I can run it on the local device.
So for over here, just make sure that you change the bundle identifier to something else. I would just change it to com, like your name, so Stormpath notes or whatever.
And then you're probably still going to have to resolve the one. Well, you might not have to resolve the one. So go back and build it now. Oh, press enter.
Now, one more thing I'm going to add.
Oh, do you have your developer account like logged in and stuff? That's probably
Okay, how many people are able to get this working right now? Okay. I'm actually a bit concerned about our timing right now if we're this far. So I think I'm going to change. I think what we're going to do. Let's make this simpler. Or let me survey you really quickly, because if we can build something different that might be like a little simpler but also get some of these concepts out here, maybe it would be faster for us to do that. How many of you are familiar with Interface Builder? Like, if you're familiar with getting around with Interface Builder, building outlets, building delegates, raise your hands. Like,
Let's say, like, adding all my content, almost my content from my HTML page
Okay. That might be.
That sounded like the same thing we did in the intro, right?
Oh, is it just like adding buttons and stuff?
Yeah, like building views.
I'm familiar with that.
Okay. Okay. What about this? Why don't we just create like a registration form from scratch, and then we can manually build out an API call to an API service. We don't need to use any SDKs or anything like that. But build an SDK API call to register, and then I'll show you how to verify it with like an API testing tool like Postman. Just make sure that you're actually registered. Does that sound like a simpler sort of thing that we can? Okay, and then if I try to rush through the building the view section, raise your hand if you're confident that we can get through building the views really quickly. Okay.
Also raise your hand if you get stuck or feel uncomfortable.
Okay, yeah, I think that's enough of us that might be an easier way for it. So, okay, let's restart from scratch then. Let's close out this project. In Xcode, let's click on File, let's click on New. Let's do a new project. And what we'll do is we're going to create a brand new iOS app. And this is going to be a single view application. All of you should be familiar with at least how to create a project right now. So I'll skip through this really quickly. Name it whatever your heart desires. Make sure the language is Swift. And then we'll go next. Next. And we have our new project. I'm going to run this new project.
I mentioned this before, but watch out for your commit messages.
Close out of my old project. Run this project.
Especially when you start working with other people, it's really important to have those commit messages so that other people can see what you're doing and make sense. Okay. Let's move on. Get ranking. So what's this master thing that you just gave on the side right here?
Okay. How many of you have a blank new project created? Raise your hands. All right. I'll give you another however long it takes my simulator to boot up. All right, cool. So we should have a blank new project. We should be able to boot it up. And we should be able to run it on the simulator. And it may take like a few seconds for a new simulator to boot up. But that should be fine. So what we'll do is we're going to create a blank registration page. And we're going to hook it up. And we're going to manually create an API call to our API service to actually register an account on it. And after we create the app page to like register an account, we're going to use the API testing tool to do the other different operations just to see if like our account's actually like registered. All right? So what we'll do, we're going to go into the storyboard. And you see the storyboard already should have a view already up. I'm going to have my view at the size of iPhone SE. But in this storyboard, what we'll do, at the bottom right-hand side, we have this, this box right here. Right now, for me, it says no matches, but it might be on a different tab. Click on the third tab right over here. If you hover over it, it's called the object library. If you click on this, we're going to search for, let's see. We'll search for text, and you'll see these option called text field. We're going to drag out 4 text fields into our view. 1, 2, 3, and 4. I'm going to make them slightly bigger as well. So we're going to drag out 4 text fields into our app. And these are going to represent the 4 things that an end user will give us to register. So the 4 things are, one is username, one is password, one is first name, and one is last name. The next thing that we're going to drag out is we're going to drag out a button. So search for button and drag in a button. And this button is going to be the submit button for our form. So I'm not going to care really too much about how this looks. Right now it looks kind of weird and skewed. But I don't really want to focus too much of this workshop on how to build views with Interface Builder. So at the end of dragging this in, we should be able just to run this. And in the simulator, we should be able to see the 4 different, if I type randomly, it just says awkward. We should be able to see the 4 different views, or 4 different text labels that we just put in. Raise your hand if you have 4 text fields and a button now. Okay. I'll give you another minute or two to get this up and running.
Okay, cool. So, if you LS, you see that you still have everything that you already have. So, I have a shortcut installed right in the design language. Graphical interface.
Okay. Raise your hand if you have all 4 text fields and the button now. Okay, I'll do another 30 seconds. Okay, cool. So we have the main storyboard set up, and we have all these 4 fields, and we have the button. So now we're going to connect them to our code. So how we'll do that is we're going to click on, you see at the upper right-hand side, if I wave my mouse enough, it turns big. And you see right up here, there's the 2 rings. Kind of looks like Olympic rings or something like that. You hover over it, it says show the assistant editor. We're going to open up the assistant editor. It's going to make my screen look super cramped. So there's these blue bars at the top side that we can click on, and that will get rid of like a bunch of these other screens that I don't really want to see right now. And that's going to show us the view controller related to this view. So we're going to drag all 4 of these. We're going to hold down the control button, and we're going to drag from these different text fields into our view controller, like right underneath our class declaration, where it says class view controller equals to UI view controller. So I'll control drag, not the command button, but control drag. And just going to name each one of these. We'll name it first name, or we'll say username, password, first name, and then last name. So if you need a quick refresher, what we just did is we linked each one of these views to our view controller right here, and we exposed them so we can now work with them and write to them with code. Question? Right, so you hold down the control button.
Swap this out.
Okay.
Power.
Oh, thank you. Sure. All right, so you hold down the control button. Can you hear me in the back now? All right, hold down the control button, and then drag from this text view. You have to be like on top of this text view into the view controller that's from the assistant editor, and just let go, name it something, and then press connect. If you don't, if it's not like successfully dragging it, that might be because the assistant editor is set to like not track the related view. So if you click and right over here at the top hand side of the assistant editor, you can see you want to switch it to automatic. It might be like on manual or some other setting. So then the last thing that we'll do, we'll click and drag our button. And we'll drag it below our two different function declarations. And this time, instead of doing an outlet, we'll switch our connection type to an action. So if I click on this, the connection type is going to be action. And we'll name this login button pressed. All right, so we just created, and right now what we can do inside the login button pressed, we can just say print the login button was pressed or something like that, just to make sure that this works. So now we can try running this again. I would like unhide the bottom bar so we can see what's in the console output. But what you should have is now all four of these. If I click on the login button right here, you'll see at the bottom it says login button was pressed. So yeah, if you link the login button correctly, it should say IB action function and then your function name. So again, it's the same thing, the control drag to over here. So that makes it so whenever someone presses the button, it's going to perform whatever code you have right over here. Okay. So here's the fun part. We're gonna figure out how APIs work, and we're gonna try making this API work based on what we have over here. So I'd like you to all go online and then search for a tool called Postman. So Postman is a really great tool that allows you to test out APIs and try sending different requests and try sending different types of data to them. So you can think of Postman as almost like a web browser, like Google Chrome or like Firefox, Internet Explorer, Safari. But it's a browser that's more designed for hitting external web services, hitting APIs. So it's, like when you open up Google Chrome, really what you can do is just type in a web page and hit enter. In Postman, you can, in the web, there's actually a lot of other pieces of data that get automatically sent to a web server that you're hitting. So with Postman allows you to customize all of those parameters a lot more specifically, with a lot more control than you have in something like Google Chrome. So go and download it. Once you download it, go back to the blog post that I had you open up earlier. Search for Postman, or let's see. Actually, no, it's not in the blog post. Never mind. So after you download Postman, what we're going to do is I'm going to show you what the API call for registering a new user looks like. So we're going to try registering a user to the online API using Postman, and then we'll try replicating that in our iOS app. Raise your hand if you have Postman downloaded and installed now. Okay. I'm going to demonstrate it really quickly, and right now just go start and downloading it, and then I'll leave it up for a little bit so you can try it out yourself. So I'm just really going to use this as demonstration. So we'll speed through this a little bit so that later on, we'll build this in the iOS app, and then we'll test things. We'll come back to Postman and figure out testing things a little more in depth. So once you have Postman opened up, you'll see that you have tabs over here, just kind of like a web browser. And what I can do is I can type in a URL to make a request against. So what I'll do is I'm going to make a request to https://stormpathnotes.herokuapp.com/register. That's stormpathnotes.herokuapp.com/register. So what we're doing here is we're sending a request to register a user. So in HTTP, there's a multitude of different request types. And usually the GET request means I want to fetch some information. When we're registering a user, we actually want to send some data to register a user. So we're actually going to change this request type to a POST request. So again, this is how most online APIs work. We're not going to really get into how designing APIs works in detail. But when we change this to a POST request, you'll see that one of the tabs right underneath the URL that we can customize is called is a body. And so when you send a POST request, you can send information to a server, and the body is the information. So in the body, we're going to send some raw data. This data is, and it gives us a menu over here, what type of data we want to send. We're going to send JSON. And then we're going to basically type in some JSON right over here. And if you're not familiar with JSON, it's basically just a format for sending data to API servers. But we're going to type in some JSON right here. We're going to say the email. And here I can say Edward plus test@stormpath.com. Password, I'll just say test1. Given name, which is kind of more of an internationalized form of first name, Edward, and then surname, Jiang. So over here again, I'm sending several pieces of information, right? Email, password, given name, and surname. If I click send, actually, the last thing that I want to do is you can see there's this portion of the POST request that's called the headers. I can actually click on here, and you can see by me setting the body and setting the body content type to JSON, it's already set a header for me to tell the server, hey, we're sending some JSON our way. The last thing that we need to do is say, hey, we expect to get back some JSON. So we're going to set another header in here for application/JSON. And say post application/JSON. I mean, it will say accept application/JSON. And when I send this request, you'll actually see here that it's going to give me my account right back that's registered. Now if I try to register again, it's actually going to give me an error because now it says, hey, account with that email already exists. Please choose another email. So that's basically how our API works right over here. Again, I don't really expect you to, if you followed along with that, we're able to register an account, that's great. If you didn't, we're going to just, I wanted to demonstrate what we're doing before we actually do it in our iOS app. So in our iOS app over here, we're going to try to send that request and basically allow us to register a new user. So let's go back to our view controller over here, where it says login button pressed. And for login button pressed, you can see right now we just printed a statement saying, hey, the login button was pressed. But what we really want to do is we want to send an HTTP call to the server. We want to say, hey, I want to register this user. And basically, we want to send the similar set of data that we just sent in Postman to the server, but except with our iOS app. So how do we do that? Well, there's several things. First off, we need to create a request object. So in iOS, there's this API called the NSURL session API. NSURL session is actually a little verbose. So in the future, if you do if you're writing a lot of API calls, a slightly easier API. It's like this external SDK that you use. It's called Alamofire. And Alamofire kind of abstracts away some of NSURL session to make things a little bit easier for you. But in our case right here, what we're just going to do is just use NSURL session. So how NSURL session works is there's a few different objects associated with it. You can read more on the Apple documentation up here, and Apple has like very in-depth documentation. There's two main objects that we're going to really keep track of. One is in Swift, it's going to be called the URL session. And this is, the URL session keeps track of a group of requests. So that means like if you're sending several requests and you need to manage like the life cycle of like, hey, maybe some of our requests are being cached, or maybe all of our requests have authentication, and so on and so forth. URL session kind of manages all of that for you. The other object that we're going to use is called the URL request, which really just manages the individual request that we're sending to the server. So in this case, we're really not going to use URL session in too much depth. We're going to really just use the URL request to basically construct what we constructed over here, this request that we constructed in Postman, but programmatically. So how do we do this? Well, the first thing is we have to create a URL request object. So we can say var request equals to URL request. URL request takes a URL object to initialize the request. So just like in Postman, we posted to https Stormpath notes.herokuapp.com/register. We're going to use that URL over here. Now, if you're unfamiliar with the Foundation URL class, how you build a URL is you just say URL with string of the string, and we actually have to do we have to put an exclamation mark after our URL. But yeah, so basically we're saying, hey, we're going to start off with a request. This request is going to start off with this URL, with this URL object that has a string of https Stormpath notes.herokuapp.com/register. This is a Foundation API from Apple. And so there's some kind of like quirks of the Foundation API, but here we actually put an exclamation mark because it's an optional object. And that means Apple's saying, hey, like this URL might actually be incorrect. It might be formatted incorrectly. And us saying exclamation mark is saying we're pretty sure that we put in actually like a correct URL. So just to prevent us from making some mistakes here. So we'll say var request equals to this URL request. What are the other things that we had to add in our request? If you remember here, we did three things to this URL request besides the URL. The first thing is we changed the method of the request. So this thing over here, it's called the HTTP method to a post request. It's not a GET request, it's a POST request. So now we say request.http method equals to capital POST. The third thing that we did is we added these headers. We added the content type saying, hey, server, let me tell you about like the data that we're sending. Here's how it's formatted. It's application JSON. And we added the accept header, which basically we said the same thing. Hey, give us some JSON back. So we can say request.setValue for HTTP header field. So we'll say set value application /JSON for HTTP header field accept. And the exact same thing for content type. The last thing that we need to do, okay, it's hard to see. Okay, sure. Hopefully this is big enough. The last thing that we need to do then is to do the HTTP body. So the body right now, we have some, in our iOS app, we have some text fields. So we need to convert this into JSON. So what we can do is we can first create a JSON object with this data. So we can say like let JSON object equals to, and what are the 4 things that we needed in our dictionary?
Username, password, first name, and last name.
Yeah. So email, password, first name, and last name. So we'll say email is, I called it username, but it's really email. So we'll say username dot text, exclamation mark. And again, like this is a UI text field from iOS, right? So the great thing about iOS is, unlike web development, is that one company really produces all of the APIs for iOS development. So if I'm unsure of how to use a text field, I can always go search online on Google. And then you'll see like this is a really great guide on how to use this, right? And if you scroll down, it says, hey, how do I access the text attributes? Well, there's a property called text, which just stands for the text displayed by the text field. So here, if I say username.text, again, this is a quirk of some Apple APIs that we have to put this exclamation mark right after text. But we'll say email is username.text. Password is password.text. Given name is first name.text. And surname is last name text.
Once again, we had a map starter local. We checked out a feature branch. We made some changes.
Yep.
So is the reasoning for that formatting like given name and surname because of the API, or is that just because you want to name it that?
Yeah, so the question is the reason why I'm calling this given name and surname because of the API? And yes, that's correct. Because you can see here, when I sent this request to API, this API has it defined. And usually this is found by reading the API's documentation. But this API requires you to call it surname, given name and surname, right? So if I call this first name and I send this request, then it's going to say, funnily enough, in this API it says first name required, but it's an error saying given name is not found. Right? It's a computer program. It has a lot of troubles kind of guessing what you mean. So yeah, that's because we're converting what we have in our app to this. And one note as well is that like a lot of times actually the convention to name these text fields in your app, usually people will actually call them something like username text field. So then it's like a little more clear that you're not just talking about the username, but you're talking specifically about the text field. I just was lazy earlier. All right. So we have this JSON object, but it's not actually JSON. It's actually a Swift dictionary right now, mapping strings to strings. So we need to change this into JSON data. So the great thing is Apple has like a, oh shoot, my simulator finally finished downloading. This is awesome. All right, so we have this JSON object, and now we need to convert it into like actual JSON data. So the request API actually has this thing called HTTP body, and that takes actual raw data. It's not looking for a string. It's looking for raw data that it can send on the wire to something else. Well, the great thing is the Apple JSON serialization tool. It's called NSJSON serialization. Actually serializes directly into data as well. So we can just say request.http body equals to try with a question mark, saying, hey, if this fails, don't worry, just like silently fail. We'll be fine with it. So try JSON serialization dot data with JSON object. You can see, by the way, I'm really lazy, and this is a really great way to just learn how Apple's APIs work. Is just let autocomplete do like half of the work for you, right? So I just literally press dot, and I'm like, okay, I want this even tells me, returns JSON from a foundation object. I'm like, hey, that sounds exactly like what I want to do, right? Like I have a foundation object, and I want data. So I'm going to say data with JSON object with options. And this API is a little more confusing here, but with options, we actually, in Swift, it's just an array of different options. We're going to actually pass in an empty array right over here, and parentheses. So this is basically going to say, hey, Apple has this tool called JSON serialization. Try serializing the data with this object called JSON object. I don't want any random options, so I'll just pass in this empty array, and we're good. So last thing that we have now is that now we have our request all completed. We have it all built out. We can say URL session dot shared. So shared just is like a global sort of session that is shared among the entire app. URL session API is kind of interesting, and by interesting, it's a little more of an older API that it feels a little more lower level. So how we do it is we say we're going to create a data task with a URL request and a completion handler. So if we're looking at autocomplete, that's the fourth one if I type in data. So it's data task with URL request and completion handler. This is one of the things I really love about Swift is that it's very readable. I can just talk about what this is called, and it sounds like I'm talking about. I'm not talking in poetry or something. So what request are we going to put in here? We're going to put in the request that we just created. The completion handler, that means what snippet of code do you want to get called once this request finishes, and we'll say if we press enter, then it's going to allow us to create a closure. So if you're not familiar with this sort of code, this is a closure. So it's basically like a small function that we're passing to URL session. So it's asking us to name the 3 different parameters we'll get back. One is optional data, one is an optional URL response, and one is an optional error. So we'll just call it data, response, and error, and then encode right here. The last thing I actually forgot to say, because this function is actually creating a task, we actually have to say let task equals to URL session.shared.data, data task. So we create this task, and the end, right after this snippet of code, we say task.resume. I know this is kind of a mouthful, but again, what we're doing right here is we're creating a task. We're saying, hey, URL session, I want you to create a task object that will do this specific task for me. And when it finishes, I want you to run the snippet of code with these 3 different pieces of information, right? The last thing is, okay, you've created this task. Now I want you to actually run this task. The reason why this is called resume instead of start or run or something like that is because you can pause this, and whoever designed this, the URL session decided that there was no point to calling, making a separate one for start, and one separate one for resume if it's paused. So it's just resume, even though we're not, starting something again. All right, so we have this task, we have this resume. Right now, we can just keep this, let's see, we can say, why don't we just try printing this response back to the console? So we could say print string with data of, let's see. We'll have to unwrap the data. So we can say if let data equals to data. That means just our stuff didn't error out. We'll print string with data of data and a coding of .utf8. So this is because raw data can be encoded in many different ways, like raw binary data could mean different text and different encoding. Usually most APIs will be using UTF-8. So right now we'll just say, hey, we're using UTF-8. Okay, so we'll say if let data equals to data, print this data out. And now we can actually try this thing out. Like we'll see what happens. And let me try it first, and then I'll leave this up on the screen for you guys to test out yourself a bit. Yeah.
Why do you unwrap it in the if statement instead of forcing it with an exclamation?
That's a good question. So the question was, why am I unwrapping the optional this way? Remember, this is an optional piece of data, meaning we can't work on it without saying, hey, either without unwrapping it in some way, right? And so earlier, like I used exclamation marks when I'm like, yeah, go for it, unwrap it. But the thing is, like when I use an exclamation mark, that's basically telling Swift, hey, if this is not there, then I'm okay with you crashing the application for me, right? And with some things, right, like this specific API for like the text, this is actually, if you read Apple's documentation about this text, it actually says it will never be nil. It will always be like either empty string or have a string in it. So it's kind of just really weird why it imports as an optional, and that just has to do with Objective-C. Like earlier with this URL, I put the exclamation mark because I was pretty sure that like I typed in the correct URL, right? But over here, this is really out of my control, right? Like, I don't know if we'll get data, right? If there's a network request and maybe I'm not connected, right? Maybe we're getting Wi-Fi problems, right? I don't want the app to crash on me, right? I should handle the error, right? But I don't want the app just to be like, oh, I couldn't connect to the internet. Let's crash the app. So that's why I use if let data equals to data. Another way you could also use the guard let data equals to data else sort of construct. But anyways, so if I say, let's try registering with random data over here, and you can actually see right over here, it's saying optional status password requires at least one numeric character. So you can see I'm actually getting a response from the API, which is good. So if I actually use correct information for everything, so warmer at, I don't know, colder.com, and then password that has capital characters, click on this button. You can see now in my console, and I have an optional string right over here, which is that account and that JSON response that we're looking for. So I think we're at 2:06 right now, so we don't have much time. We have -6 minutes to actually test out the rest of the thing. But I think if you see this text being outputted over here, I mean we know what the successful response looks like. So we know that like we did actually successfully register an account over here. So I'm going to leave this code up for a little bit as well, so you guys can see this and type it in and try debugging. And I'm not sure. I don't think we're really doing anything with this room after, right, Sam? Okay. Yeah. So it's going to be an open workshop time. So I'm happy to stick around and help everyone with getting their iOS this API call finished. Or if you want to try starting out with that tutorial that I do have online. You can start working out on that and messing around with it. But pretty much what I want you to get before the end of this workshop is really just to flesh out this one API call over here and make it so at the end you press the button, and in your console it actually shows, hey, like either an error because you didn't register with something that meets whatever the API wants, or with the success where it's actually returning the actual account object. So once you do that, I think then it gets like really straightforward to start building more and more things in your iOS application, right? Like we registered the account. We can consume the data in a very similar way, right? Right here we said JSON serialization.data with JSON object. There's also JSON serialization.object or JSON object with data, which basically does the exact opposite of what we just did, right?
Unravels it.
Right. It takes a JSON object that you might get from an API and converts it into a foundation object. So you can do that. And then now you can start building more views. And then now you have a fully functioning app. So thank you so much for joining me over here today. I hope it was helpful, and I know we ran into some hiccups earlier, but yeah, thanks so much.